Well, we're 0-2 in Big East play, folks. Seton Hall losing at Villanova, and then in a game against the Georgetown Hoyas, got off to a slow start, and that ended up dooming the Pirates as their ferocious comeback came up just 1 point short with a very underwhelming finish, and I feel like I'm putting that lightly. And after a 9-day break from game to game between the Georgetown game and the upcoming game on New Year's Eve. 9-day break. Hopefully, that'll give the Pirates some time to reset and refocus before they take on the Xavier Musketeers for a end of 2024 clash in the Queen City. Welcome into this edition of Hoist the Colors. We're going to be discussing all of that and a whole lot more. I'm Tim Best. He's Pat Madden. Well, Pat, first game of Big East play at Villanova. I talked about it at length, the fact that this team hadn't won at Finner Pavilion since 1994 when the now president of basketball ops for the Chicago Bulls, Arturas Karnisovas, was the starting center. I don't need to say anything further beyond that. But the streak continued on December the 17th. Pat, what were your overall takeaways from a game that, you know, Villanova got out to an early lead, and Seton Hall just couldn't close the gap enough to make it a potentially winnable game?
Well, I mean that was where, unfortunately, the one thing that you would think that you could count on a little bit, at least against Villanova, was the defense. And uh, I don't think in our preview we mentioned Tyler Perkins, of all people. But Tyler Perkins decides to have maybe his one of his best games at Villanova, where I think he went like I don't have the box score in front of me. He went 4 for 6 from three on a night where, at least in the first 30 minutes of the game, they did a pretty good job shutting down Eric Dixon, who is, I don't know if he's still the leading scorer in the country, but came into the game as the leading scorer in the country. I mean, he still put up 25 points, but he put up a lot of them as Villanova was pulling away, uh, sort of between the 12 and 6 minute mark of the second half. I mean, it was one of those situations where, you needed to make a few stops. And you would have thought, the way this team was playing defense during a good deal of non conference play, you could think about making a few stops. It's also, I guess, a little bit frustrating, when you then look at Villanova's next game when they lost to Creighton at Creighton, that their offense just didn't function quite as efficiently in that game. So, even though Villanova's got one of the better offenses in the Big East, in that sense, it was one of those situations where, I guess the good news is that they didn't get embarrassed and didn't get run off the court. I mean, we've both seen times when better Seton Hall teams, including last year, were non-competitive at Villanova. So at least this was a game with about 10 minutes to go. Unfortunately, the things that you need to do to reverse what was sort of like a 3 or 4 possession game didn't happen. They didn't make stops. At least the offense seemed to perform reasonably well. Of course, Isaiah Coleman, of course, is, and this was even more pronounced against Georgetown, last Sunday. Isaiah Coleman is establishing himself as the go-to guy. Dylan Adewusu put up a few points. Now, we put up a few points in sort of garbage time when the lead was 15-16, and he hit a couple of jumpers to cut the lead back to the 12-point margin of victory for Villanova. But at least there were signs the offense played a little bit better than we thought they've played. The defense just, they couldn't stop Tyler Perkins, and then conversely, Dixon started to find his groove later in the game, and by the time Seton Hall sort of stopped the bleeding, it was too late against Villanova.
So I'm looking at Tyler Perkins's numbers. Um, he had put up double digits before the 17th. One, two, three, 5 times. His season high was 13, but he's only averaging 8.2 points a game. And of course, at Creighton, goes 1 for 5 with just 2 points. Go figure. And to answer your question about Eric Dixon, he is still leading the country in scoring at nearly 26 a game. Um, so the fact that they allowed Villanova to shoot 55% from the floor, um, while Seton Hall 39%. Like if you're under 40%, that doesn't bode well. Eh, one thing I will give him credit for, under 10 turnovers, just 8 for the game. So you like to see them protecting the ball. The shots just weren't falling, which, trust me, we're going to get to the shots not falling with the next game they played. But Isaiah Coleman, yeah, he did establish himself as now the go-to guy on this team. So much so that on Sunday, he finally earned the honor from the one and only Tim McClune with the he is because Tim McClune hadn't delegated that to any one player on the team this year, and Sunday he finally did. So more on that in just a second. But what another thing, Prince of League based minutes went way down. Um, Scotty Middleton played 20 minutes. To me, played 21 minutes. Chauncey Jenkins put up 14 off the bench, which was good. A guy like him, I feel like he's good both as a starter and off the bench, given the kind of offense that he can provide. But again, it comes with the duality of him being consistent, or in this case, inconsistent, because there are some games where he looks great, like he did in Charleston, and like at Villanova. And then there are other games where he is a non-factor and can't get shots to fall. I mean, he was 4 for 14, which is under 30% from the game. 2 for 6 from downtown, which did give them a bit of a get him a boost to get some points on the board. But 6 for 17, compare that to 9 for 21 for Villanova. And the thing is, too, and this is going to be a recurring theme, they had 12 offensive rebounds, Seton Hall did, to Villanova's 3. So speaking of, let's go to that Georgetown game. They got themselves down early, and it was a hole that I wish they dug themselves. I mean, they kind of did, but it was too late. And it just aggravated because Georgetown beat Seton Hall at the Rock for the first time in nearly a decade. And it was my freshman year at the Hall, which is just mind blowing to me. And that was the last time that Kevin Willard had missed the tournament um, before, going on that streak with, beginning with 2016 and it was going to go into 2020. Um, but Georgetown, they and also like Nova, they shot over 50% from the floor. Um, they turned it over 19 times as well. Seton Hall forced 19 turnovers. But when you get 22 offensive rebounds, which is fantastic, but you fail to get second chance points, and you also go 3 for 24 from behind the arc. 3 for 24. Unfortunately, that all adds up, and it all really came to a head with the fact that on the last play, Dylan Adewusu came down the court or no, it's either he came down the court or it was a set in the front court, and they couldn't get the ball to Isaiah Coleman, and then Dylan Adewusu couldn't even get a shot up, and that's how we lost. And I think that's the first time I've angrily screamed at the television at a Seton Hall game in a long time. And for those of you who know me, it takes a lot for me to yell angrily at Seton Hall because normally I try to empathize and be like a healthy, like a non-toxic fan. But that finish or lack thereof with the fact that they couldn't even get the shot off to at least try to win the game. I think it's just if you're a Seton Hall fan, you weren't frustrated with that. Are you actually a fan? I hate to question it, but like it's kind of true. It just aggravating all around. Pat, I mean, what more do you have to say on that?
I look, games like that you can and you can't pin it on one play.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's fair to say that you would have hoped that at least you to not put the ball up with 10 seconds to go is inexcusable in the moment. And again, that sort of goes to an issue we've talked about a lot this year, which is that Wusu should not really be the point guard on this team. He's gotten the role more often than not because of default, meaning, you know, Garway Duel is more suited to be a point guard. Unfortunately, Duel didn't. Duel was part of the group that caused Seton Hall to go into the hole early on, and you could tell that Holloway had lost patience with Duel, with Emmanuel Okorafor again, and Prince Aligbe. Uh, Aligbe, I don't think Aligbe even started. He might have only played a few minutes
Yeah, he only
uh,
played 3 minutes off the
on
bench.
on Sunday night. So I mean, there's certainly guys on this team that Holloway has, to a certain extent, lost confidence in, and he made a point of reminding everyone that after the game on Sunday. I think he made a. I don't remember. It was a week ago, so forgive me for not remembering exactly the quotes from last Sunday night. But I think he made a point of saying after the game in one of in the press conference afterwards that he's frustrated that there are players who are not really playing for the team, and that's something which has always been inexcusable for Shaheen Holloway. Uh, let's say a couple of positives about early on, Thomas Sorber, the elite freshman center for Georgetown, who looks more and more as if he's only going to be there for 1 year and is going to be a first round draft pick in the NBA. He got off to a really good start. I think he had 15 points in the first 25 minutes of the game. And then guess who comes to the rescue and shuts Yalden down? I mean, shuts Sorber down. Gus Yalden,
Gus Bus,
of all
baby.
people. 13 minutes. I mean, the stat sheet does not do justice to what Yalden was able to do to make things frustrating for Sorbert because, when you're in Georgetown's situation and you see, you know, although they did pull out to 11 points up with, I think, 3.5 minutes to go, there were times in that second half where Georgetown was just begging for an answer and couldn't find one. Now, conversely, there were numerous opportunities Seton Hall had, sort of in the period of the game between the 12-minute mark and the 4-minute mark, where a couple of timely baskets could have made things interesting a lot earlier than the last 4 minutes of the game when Seton Hall scored the last 10 points of the game to take an 11-point deficit down to one when when they did have that last opportunity to potentially steal one from Georgetown. So Gus Yalden played a tremendous game. Isaiah Coleman hit his career high with 25 points. Uh, I think he hit one or two threes. I don't think he was exclusively using that. I think most of his damage was done either on layups or on his little middle of the lane, 10 to 12-foot jump shots, which he's become almost unstoppable when he gets the opportunity to drive the ball down the lane. And Georgetown was having some difficulty stopping him at that at various stretches during the game. So that there are a couple of positives. The 3 pointers. I mean, unfortunately, you're going to run into nights where you cannot knock a shot down. Middleton couldn't hit a shot. Jenkins couldn't hit a shot. Wusu missed a bunch of 3 pointers. So in that sense, you're just going to run in that. That's unfortunate. That's part of where you would hope that and I think the defense again, they did a pretty good job shutting down Sorber after Sorber got off to a fast start. Jay Neps was not the Jay Neps that you would expect, and he goes down with I think it was about 6 minutes to go. He
I'm
got
shocked.
hurt.
I'm shocked he even came back. It looked like he was done for the night, and he's 3 minutes later. I'm like, he's back in.
They had nobody to hand. I mean, you talked about the 19 turnovers. They had nobody because Malik Mack, who's usually their starting point guard, was out with a leg injury. He came back yesterday, for Georgetown. Epps didn't play yesterday, so They didn't have the benefit of having Malik Mack on the court to run the offense, so that's why they were so desperate. Their roster, they were playing Malik Peavy, who's a 6'8" power forward at the point, and Peavy, that's part of the problem why Georgetown didn't score in the last 3.5 minutes is that they couldn't find they couldn't run a functioning offense in the last 3.5 minutes, and it was just sort of bad luck on Seton Hall's part that they couldn't get the one basket that they needed to get over the top in that game. I mean, you talk about, hey, we've beaten Georgetown the last, I think, 8 or 9 times at the Rock.
Hmm.
But I mean, this Georgetown team we're seeing this, and this is not to make an excuse for losing this game, by the way, but this is not the Patrick Ewing Georgetown that unfortunately we grew to love because we could just beat them on a regular basis. This Georgetown team is and we talked about this when we did our preview a couple of weeks ago. This Georgetown team is improved. So I think that the fact that Seton Hall took them down to the wire and almost picked them off, is a testament to Seton Hall playing a lot better than they did a month ago when they were losing games when they lost to Monmouth and then lost those 2 games in the first couple of weeks to Fordham and Hofstra.
Yeah. Obviously, I agree with a lot of the positives. The fact, they forced 19 turnovers. They clawed their way back. Gus was the energy guy, and essentially he sacrificed himself with fouling himself out. The 2 points in 14 minutes. The 2 points that he did get were so crucial in that comeback effort where he got a second chance bucket off glass, put it in, and really got this crowd really energized and got their enthusiasm, like brought them to a fever pitch and uh, really woke the crowd up after being so dead after that lackadaisical start. But yeah, you look at, Garway Dual only played 8 minutes. Okorafor played 7 minutes. Yazin to me played awful again, 16 minutes. And that was in the starting spot in this case. But yeah, a guy like Gus Yalden, I mean, what he does for this team, the vast majority of it, in my mind, doesn't, you can't, it's not reflected in the stat sheet, like you pointed out earlier. So I'm hoping that he'll continue to make that kind of impact like that, where he can just be a pest on whatever, center or power forward, whatever Shaw defensive assignment that he'll give to Yalden when he comes off the bench, that he'll just be a gnat and be a pest to whatever big he is assigned to guard and be, especially at home, being that energy guy, but even on the road, being the guy who's gonna rejuvenate his teammates and inject some life into them when things aren't looking good and not going their way. But Isaiah was very good. I mean, 8 for 20 from the floor. He only took four threes and he went 1 for 4. Um, but yeah, I think that yeah, it was really disappointing. But again, we got to remember again, this Georgetown team also they beat Creighton by 24. So just before we like, oh, we let the door down. Like, yes, I know it sucks. Believe me, we know. But they beat Creighton by 24. It's not like they beat them on like a buzzer beater. They won by one possession. They beat them by 24. Like, just keep that in mind, people. But it wasn't the fact that we lost to Georgetown, it was the way in which we lost. But before we move on to Xavier, can I address the real elephant in the room in the first half? James Breeding again being an absolute menace to society, and he has a special place in hell right now. I mean, how do you mess up the foul count twice in the first half? Like how? How can you be a D1 official who's
In
got
in
multiple
in
Final Fours
30
and
in
you
30
messed that up?
seconds
Jesus.
and he had McClune announce, at least I think on the one he announces that it's a 1-1,
Yeah.
It's you just heard that it's a 1-1. So I know part of it that this is to cycle back to Wusu on the foul shot you just referenced, where they lost track of the fact it was a 1-on-1, and everyone got confused thinking it was two shots. You know, whoever took the shot misses the foul shot. It ends up in Wusu's hand, and instead of like going straight up, because he should also know it's a 1-on-1, and he should know if the ball ends up in his hand, just throw it in the basket. Because if he knocks that layup in, it's going to count. And then you can't sort of say, hey, 2 points would have made the difference at that point. But in theory, you add those 2 points, and Seton Hall wins this game by one,
Yeah.
and he's the hero and not the goat. But the GOAT meaning, the guy who causes you to lose the game, not the
Yeah.
greatest of all time,
Correct.
just for reference. I mean, goats when I grew up were people who made boneheaded plays and lost games. Now goats are the ones who get put in the Hall of Fame and get statutes. I mean, Wusu is definitely not getting a statute put to his honor anytime soon unless he scores 30 points against St. John's in a couple of weeks. But if he hits that layup, that counts, because ultimately what happened was, because they didn't know how, they didn't really they treated it as if the ball went off both. They treated it like they put a jump ball, and then 30 seconds later, Georgetown's in the double bonus. They're getting two shots, and then everyone's jumping for. I think Georgetown uh, missed. Whoever it was missed the shot. Everyone's jumping up for a rebound, and then everyone's like, "Wait a second! There's a second foul shot. This guy's entitled to two foul shots," and you hear it. It's like, look, we could go into a whole discussion about it. One of it's funny. They joke about this other great referee named Roger Ayers,
Hmm.
but the joke is that Roger Ayers worked a basketball game the first 30, I think 32 days of
Yeah.
the season, from like November the 4th to like December the 5th or 6th.
Yeah.
So these guys are just the referees do too, and I've talked about this in the Big East blog, just for reference, and I'll link it to this. I'll link it to this episode. Referees get they because referees are independent contractors. This is they don't get. I don't think it. Maybe in a couple of circumstances, but as a general rule, they're independent contractors. So they do as many games as possible, and there's no regard for how many games they do in a row and where they travel to vary. I mean, you could be doing referees do games out in Texas one night, Florida the next night, and then they'll travel to like Wisconsin the third night in a row. So Breeding definitely did a Breeding at least did one or two games earlier that weekend, and is now coming in on a Sunday night. These referees mostly, I guess for the most part, you have to give the referees the benefit of the doubt. On the other hand, when you're talking about how often you travel, things are going to get lost in translation, and unfortunately, that happened with this weird sequence that happened late in the first half of that game on Sunday.
So my reply to all this. So again, with breeding, would Tim McClune lie blatantly about a 1-1 versus two? Like he's got the data like right with him, whether that be from the great Danny Fishbane, who is, I can't say enough about. Danny is a goat when it comes to game management. Um, he's
He's
worked
the
his
official scorer, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And like he helps the officials when it comes to replay reviews and other matters like that. So Danny, with his integrity, he's feeding Tim McClune the correct information, and Tim is saying that over the mic. He's not trying to mislead the officials. So if if he's saying that, Tim McClune's telling the truth. I mean, look at the man's charity work. The man doesn't lie. I mean, nor would he like do something like that. given what he does with charity, especially during the holidays with the Christmas Express and all that great stuff. So and I'm going on a tangent, but like, I mean, what? Why are you trusting that? If you're saying 1-1, like trust that. But more importantly, here's something they got wrong. When Adewusu had it in his hands, like it's a live ball. He has control. Therefore, Seton Hall has team control. If he blows the play dead, Seton Hall's team control. Therefore, they have the ball, and the ball will be administered for a throw-in nearest the point of interruption. So they adjudicated that procedure incorrectly. And Pat, you made a great point about, Dylan today, all he has to do to lay that in, and they can't wipe it off the scoreboard because they're in the correctable error window. I'm gonna bestow a little wisdom on y'all. Um, you only have a certain window to correct an error. So it's dead ball, live ball, and then once the ball becomes dead again, and then once it becomes live again, that's when the window shuts. So the ball is dead, the ball's live, when the shot goes up. And it remains live until it goes through the basket. And once it goes through the basket, it's live once again. So once that basket's made, window shut.
But
So,
what's also sort of comical about this is that you know Sheen Holloway acts on the sideline when both of these things happen. By the way, as if he didn't know what was that. That was just sort of the weird experience about those two circumstances at the time. He's sort of complaining, "Why didn't my guy get a second foul shot?" And the fact is he's not entitled to a second foul shot. When you miss the front end of a 1-and-1, it's a live ball once it goes off the rim, and then whatever happens happens. Unfortunately, if I remember the play correctly, the ball goes. Wusu gets the ball briefly, but then because he's there's whistles going on, the ball flies off his hand and out of bounds. So I don't. It's again, it's one of those sort of weird situations. Unfortunately, it ends up being a 1 point game. It's a game where if they lose by 10 points, you don't even think about it. But in this type of situation, it's just sort of like it's just one of the weird things. It was just as an overall to put an overall bow on this whole thing, it was just one of those sort of weird basketball games where where again once Georgetown took that sort of, and it wasn't the biggest lead we've seen. I mean, they certainly didn't get as far ahead as Oklahoma State did a few weeks ago. When we played them up at the Rock. So it was one of those things where you're waiting for Georgetown to take the big run and put the game away the way Villanova did uh, a week ago Tuesday, and they just for whatever reason they couldn't do so. But then on the flip side, you're also waiting for Seton Hall to do more than just hit a basket here and there to cut an 8 point lead to 6 or a 6 point lead to 4. And the only time they really broke through and made it and put the game within a possession or two was in the last minute of the game. And then unfortunately you get to the Wusu play where from somebody who was seeing it live in the building. I think he was intending on going to Coleman, but of course Georgetown, puts basically fronts and backs Coleman and dared Wusu to go either on his own or to go to someplace else. And I think once the first option wasn't there, Wusu unfortunately panicked. And again, that goes to the fact that he's not a point guard. Uh, that should be. And the funny thing is, just sheer Felton uh, played a lot of minutes. Played a lot more minutes on Sunday night than he had since Charleston. And Felton, I think, ended up with 6 points.
yeah.
Uh, did a solid job running the point. And I get again. You're in the last minute of a Big East Conference game. But if you've given him that many minutes and he's performed reasonably well, why not give Felton the last play? Why not put the ball in the hands of someone who has played point guard more often in their basketball career? And at worst, Felton's instinct would have been to at least try to take the ball towards the basket. And if he gets the shot blocked or he throws it an air ball, so be it. You know what? You basically say you chalk that up to giving a freshman a chance to have the experience to try to make the last play, as opposed to a guy who historically, even though Wusu does a reasonably good job of not turning the ball over, you know, asking him to make a play is sometimes more than Dylan Adewusu is capable of.
Yeah, so great point about Felton. I thought Jashim was fantastic in the minutes that he did play. I wish he got a little more playing time in the second half, like, so that Shah showed that he has faith in him to, play big minutes down the stretch in a tight game, in a conference game, no less. But maybe he'll start going with it more as the season goes along, beginning with that New Year's Eve tilt in Cincinnati. So here's another thing I was thinking about after the final buzzer went off. Seton Hall had one more timeout, and they weren't getting the look that they wanted. The one thing I was worried about and was thinking about was, and I don't know if Jerry Carino or any of the reporters in the room asked Shaw about the fact that he had another timeout that he could potentially use to try to draw something up different, considering what Georgetown was giving him defensively and completely denying Isaiah Coleman the ball, knowing that there were other options who could put the ball in the basket, like a Scotty Middleton, for example, who he can make threes. But unfortunately, was ice cold in this game in particular. Chauncey Jenkins, more than capable scorer. That there's if Coleman's being denied, who's your next best scorer? Chauncey Jenkins, that you can count on for a bucket at any given moment. So that's the one thing that kind of befuddled me, that, Shaw had one more timeout, and he really, given the look that he got, he really could have used it to maybe draw something up that would divert the attention away from Coleman and give a guy like Jenkins or Middleton um, the look to potentially win the game, compared to Dylan Adewusu having to panic and make the decision that he ultimately made, which was unfortunately him not even getting a shot up to potentially win the game. But so that was just my final thought on that game. So turning the page now to New Year's Eve in Cincinnati. Um, Pat, well, we waited a week now, for this. I teased it a little bit. Actually, no, it's been 2 weeks since we last recorded. Damn. I completely forgot about Monday, which would have been really nice to have an airing of grievances on Festivus. Shout out to Seinfeld. But we've been waiting on this since the last episode. So for that 2 o'clock tip off on Peacock New Year's Eve, you won't be watching on Peacock. You're gonna be watching somewhere else.
That's right. My wife and I are on our way to Cincinnati tomorrow to check out. First time to see a game at Cintas, one of the better buildings in the Big East. I guess it will be a little bit different because there won't be students because Xavier's on their winter break. But again, it's I had actually been out to. We have actually both been out. You and I have both been out to Cincinnati sometime over the summer. I've been out in August. You've been out in September. But I drove by campus. I stopped by the famous Dana Gardens.
Oh yeah.
I'll be making a stop there at some point, hopefully during our trip out this week. So I'll be in the building to witness the Pirates on the road. I guess the last time I saw a road game was out at UBS last February. So that ought to be interesting uh, in that sense. To maybe preview Xavier a little bit. Xavier played two excellent games against the two best teams in the Big East. The first week of conference play last week, they played a thrilling overtime game at Connecticut where they shot the lights out of the ball. They shot the lights out and kept hitting threes every time, almost every time they needed one. And Connecticut needed every bit of whatever they did from Solomon Ball and Alex Caravan to sneak out of the XL Center in Hartford. And then last Saturday, they make a furious comeback against Marquette. And you and I talked about this. You and I talked about this with a couple of people about the end of that game,
Hmm.
where did I think his name is Chase Ross. Did Chase Ross interfere with? I think it was what's the name of the point guard? McKnight on Xavier.
Davion McKnight.
Yeah, I think it was McKnight was trying to drive up, uh, trying to drive up to make a play, which would have either tied or won the game for Xavier in the closing seconds. And Chase Ross of Marquette takes an interesting stance where he never made contact, but he did obstruct McKnight's path to the basket. And one of our other favorite referees in the Big East, Brian O'Connell, was too far from the play to see what happened so that he doesn't make any call at all. And McKnight ends up losing the ball out of bounds, and Xavier's attempt at getting an upset at home against Marquette a week ago Saturday comes up just short. So the Xavier team has a lot of the same things going on that last year's team had. Unfortunately for them, Zach Fremantle is hurt again. This time he hurt his knee. He hurt his knee a couple of weeks ago in their game against Cincinnati. So I don't think he's going to be available for this game, which leaves them very thin in the middle. Uh, Jerome Hunter's only 6'8", and he's going to be the starting center. And then they're going to bring John Ugly, who's on his fourth team. He's a big guy, but he has not played particularly well for Xavier this season. So they're going to rely a lot on their backcourt. Now they have good backcourt players. We mentioned McKnight. They have two transfers who have come in. One guy's been doing it all year in the transfer from Indiana State, Ryan Conwell,
Yeah.
who happened to didn't play very well against Seton Hall in the NIT final, except that he did hit. I think he hit the last basket of the game that Indiana State hit that gave them the 7-point lead with 2.5 minutes ago.
Yeah,
That
that's right.
Seton Hall happened to catch up on. So we all know what Ryan Conwell is capable of doing, and he's been doing it all season. The one guy who has stepped up in Fremantle's, even though he's only a shooting guard, the one guy who has stepped up to pick up the scoring slack for Fremantle is another transfer. This guy came from Toledo, Dante Maddox. So they have a lot of good scoring guards, and unfortunately, at times, and we saw this with Perkins against Villanova. We saw this against Vanderbilt. We've seen it unfortunately in the Monmouth and to a lesser extent the NJIT games. Uh, Guys who can shoot can give Seton Hall fits because unfortunately, the way that the defense functions at times, they overhelp on the drive. And very few point guards in the Big East are as good at penetrating the lane as Davion McKnight. Uh, and this was something they used time and time again against Connecticut in particular. So that's something that Seton Hall's. Sometimes you got to stay at home when you're on defense. It's one of these weird things that McKnight might drive the lane and put up a bunch of points in the paint, but maybe it's better to take your chances. Maybe the poison you need to pick on defense is see what McKnight can do, particularly if he's got a guy like Dylan Adewusu on him or Chauncey Jenkins or whoever the case is going to draw the assignment. Maybe you just you let somebody just go one on one, and you make sure if you're a guy like Coleman, you're a guy like Middleton or Jenkins or whoever else is guarding Conwell and Maddox, you make sure you stay at home and keep a hand in those guys' faces and don't let those guys shoot the lights out and blow you out of Cintas on Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what happened last year. Seton Hall got run out of Cintas because the Musketeers shot the lights out, led by honestly one of my favorite people that I've ever talked to. Being around the Big East, Quincy Olivari. I saw him on the Lakers bench Christmas Day when they played the Warriors. Just made my heart whole. And by the way, shout out to Jerome Hunter. He had, his heart issues. For him to make it back, was really, really cool to see. And getting to hear him talk about the fact that Big East Media Day, his favorite show of all time is The Office. That was fantastic. And he lit up when I told him I was from Utica, and he knew exactly what that meant. With the whole Branch Wars episode, if you know, you know. Um, but yeah, you you're definitely right. You don't want Xavier to light you up from deep, and the best way to do it, stay at home on the defenders, make them go inside rather than you know you're converging on the drive to the basket and leaving Conwell and Marcus Foster to a lesser extent. No, not the Marcus Foster from 7 years ago from Creighton. Big difference, although both were buckets. But yeah, you don't want to get yourself into that situation where you open up the 3-point line and Xavier's got shooters and they can make shots. So that's the last thing you want to do. So yeah, stay at home. I know, however, though, they switch on everything. Seton Hall does when it comes to ball screens. They just switch on everything. So they might have to practice a teeny bit more patience with that in this game, given what Xavier is capable of from behind the arc. And I think from a Seton Hall expectation standpoint, well, obviously I'm not expecting to win, but what I am expecting out of this team is to be a lot better defensively because the last two opponents have each shot over 50% from the field. While it's great to see them forcing turnovers, they forced Villanova to turn it over 11 times, which I feel like is above their season average. And then Georgetown turning them over 19 times. I feel like 10's the magic number. Like you got to force at least 10, but against a team like Xavier, you might have to get it push it to like the 13 to 15 range to really stand a chance. But you also at the same time, you got to block out and make sure that they're not shooting efficiently and you're not giving them really good looks when you're not turning them over. And as for Seton Hall, on their side, well, 3 for 24 from three. Well, the thing is with Seton Hall, they don't take a lot of threes. So I don't know why they took 24 threes last time out, considering they only made three of them. Like when they weren't falling, like you probably should have gone with something different. They're going with a different look instead of just like hoping, just keep chucking up the threes, hoping that
I
something's gonna
I
fall.
think part of the problem with that though, Tim, was that because you're losing, and they were consistently in the 6 to 10 point behind stage. You do sometimes get you do sometimes try to emphasize shooting threes to get back into the game, and a lot of the shots, to be honest, were not hideous shots.
Yeah,
You mentioned Jenkins and Middleton. More often than not, I don't know what the two of them combined for three for the game, but in general, you have an expectation that they're not going to just go, let's say, 2 for 15 from three. You would expect that if they take 15 shots between them from three, they're going to knock down between 4 to 6 of them, if not more, which then would have given Seton Hall a comfortable margin of victory. But again, you cannot necessarily that's sort of that you're mentioning that sort of a double-edged sword about the Seton Hall offense, because a
right.
lot of people have talked during the season about, well, going into that Georgetown game in particular, I think they're at, like, say, 37, 38% from three. And if you're saying they're having trouble scoring, but they're shooting a good efficiency from three, you would think maybe put more 3 point shots into the offensive game plan. And then unfortunately, you have nights like the Georgetown night when the numbers sort of balance themselves out, and you have such a bad game from three. Sometimes a team that that relies like Villanova is a prime example of that. Villanova's been relying on the 3-point shot for years. And if they run into a night when they go, let's say 5 for 27, I think that happened. I think that happened against St. Joseph's earlier this season. They went like 5 for 27 from three, and they lost the game to St. Joseph's back in November. So when you become too reliant upon the three, you run into a situation like what happened against Georgetown, where you miss all of those threes. Of course, the problem, one of the other issues that we touched upon briefly, was that they get these offensive rebounds, and then they don't capitalize on them. A lot of times, what happens with these offensive rebounds is, unfortunately, they have a bad habit of kicking the ball out and restarting the offense instead of just going right back up with the offensive rebound and trying to do something with it. So I think those are just some things which, look, they've had a week now between, or they will have had 9 days, and you take a day or two off during Christmas week. Some of the kids go home or whatever the situation is, but you've had about a little bit more of a week's worth of practice between last Sunday and this Tuesday to sort of work on some things. So maybe we'll see how that manifests itself out when they hit the court. It's sort of a weird stretch for Seton Hall that they're only going to end up playing one game in a 17-day period. You get 9 days between last Sunday and Tuesday afternoon, and then you get 8 days from Tuesday afternoon to their next game, which is their game on January the 8th at home against DePaul. So, really you're playing one game in a 16-day period right at the beginning of conference play. So, there's probably a lot. And one of the other things that Holloway obviously is doing is trying to figure out his rotation. I think in a perfect world, a core for a league bay and duel are, you know, are rounding in the form at this stage of the season. Again, we're at the beginning of conference play. These are three guys who are in your starting, who you were thinking were going to be in your starting lineup before the season started. Now, Okorafor unfortunately had his health issues in the preseason, and that's why he was not ready to go opening night. But now he's been on the court. He's had a couple of nights where he did play starter minutes at the center position. You can't have him sort of going half speed. You can't, you can't. And then the problem with that is that you have to make adjustments as to who's playing the center. You've got his two backups, if you will, are Godswin Aaron A, who is a raw freshman. You know, he's got the look. Occasionally, he makes some plays, but you know your expectations of him have to be really low. And then you got Gussie Alden, 4-star guy, but it's clear that what he has in enthusiasm, he lacks in athletic ability. So now you have to make adjustments to your plan. You were thinking you were going to have this guy like a Okorafor who's got some athleticism, who's got a little bit of an outside shot, who's got a very diverse skill set, but unfortunately there are nights he chooses not to show up, and then that wrecks your game plan altogether. So, this is going to be an interesting time to see what the rotation looks like and once we get to January 8th, by the way, I think they only get like one more bye the rest of the season. So basically, it's two games a week between the middle of January all the way running to the first week of March. So that's an intensive 17-game stretch where you have to sort of see what you've got, and you've got to think also a little bit about the future here, because and I'm rambling here a little bit, but let's be honest. This team is not going to get an at-large bid. They're not going to win 14 of their last 17 or 18 games in the conference and get an at-large bid. That unfortunately is not happening, unless everyone else in the Big East gets significant injuries, and for some reason Seton Hall is the only healthy team left in the Big East. The flip side is you have to sort of look at the future here. You have to, again, the good thing is that Holloway is establishing Isaiah Coleman as a player who, if you can find a way to keep him around next year, you have a significant building block already. And then you look at guys like Felton and Yalden, and maybe to a lesser extent, a guy like a Scotty Middleton, or you look at some of your younger guys on this roster, and you try to at least get some people established in roles so that you have something which, if it all came back, at least if some of the key pieces come back next season, you can make this team look like the team they were last year, which had a lot of guys who are coming back for their second season at Seton Hall who played a lot better their second season than they did their first season 3 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Looking at the future is something that's going to be a point of emphasis, at least for Shaheen Holloway and the rest of the staff. Making sure you retain Isaiah Coleman into the future, which I think that not obviously I'm not gonna say it's not in the bag yet. However, prioritizing him, knowing that he is the go-to guy, that I mean, given how much they played him last year, that was what kept him here for this year. And now that he is the go-to guy, they're clearly prioritizing him and giving him more incentive to return for another year. Unless, he has the aspirations of wanting to play for a more successful program. I'm praying to God that that doesn't happen because things are already going bad enough for our team. I mean, God, if you're going to be nice to us, please let this team keep Isaiah for at least one more year. That's all I'm asking for. And I feel like I don't ask for God. I don't ask God for much. I didn't ask Santa for much this Christmas. But and even like a guy like Jasheem Felton, I think we trended in the right direction with the minutes he got against Georgetown. And if he keeps this up, Shao's gonna play him more minutes because he brings effort, and like that's one of the biggest things when it comes to what Shaheen Holloway wants in a player that's gonna play for him. Effort, like it's got to be in the top three at the very least. I mean, desire, dedication, discipline, and effort encapsulates all three of those things. If I'm being completely honest with you, so Felton gets more minutes, that'll definitely help embolden the future of the program, making sure that they have two important pieces retained for at least the following year. And if you're able to retain them again, have them as a senior and a junior for the 2027 season. Wow, that just hit me like a ton of bricks. That'd be 2027 by now. Good golly. But anyways, yeah, you just want to expect them to play at their best, play the best they possibly can, because you can't expect them to, you know, run with the likes of UConn and Marquette, and to a lesser extent, like Creighton. You can't expect them to like play at that level and compete with those teams on any given night, because there are some nights where they're going to get blown out. But the fact that 2 games in, they held their own against Villanova, didn't like things get too ugly there and lost by 12, and then started off terribly against Georgetown, but forced it, nearly won it, lost by 1 point in a heartbreaker. Like those kind of game, I mean, and to go back to the fact that they also lost a heartbreaker to Rutgers, a game they really should have won, but they kind of let slip out of their hands. Like they're trending in that right direction in that sense. It's just the only thing that isn't coming as a result of that are W's. Like they're just not. It's just not showing up in the win column just yet. But overall, going into New Year's Eve, um, I mean, like I said, I'm not expecting Seton Hall to win this game. Um, it's not impossible for them to win either, but I think Xavier will win this game. Seton Hall, they're really going to have to do a lot of things well, and they also need Xavier to, have the kind of shooting struggles that the Pirates themselves just had on Sunday of last week when they lost that tough one to Georgetown. But Pat, for you, what does Seton Hall have to do to close the calendar year of 2024 on the right note?
Well, besides, again, stopping the outside shooters, they should attack the paint in this game. You're not facing Thomas Sorber. You're not facing a guy who's a potential NBA first round draft pick on Tuesday. You're facing undersized. Now he leaves it all out on the floor, but you're facing undersized Jerome Hunter, who's really a small forward being forced to play center because they don't have Zach Fremantle. And you're facing John Ugley, who, John Ugley has seen better days. He just really has not found he hasn't found a rhythm at Xavier. Now, again, they're also coming off of 9 or 10 days off. So maybe Sean Miller has Sean Miller has given Ugley a few lectures and told him, "Hey, look, not for nothing, you know, you came here to make the NCAA tournament, and the way things are looking right now, you guys aren't making the NCAA tournament. You're 0-2 in conference. Your best win of the season is against a South Carolina team that's not particularly that's not as good as they were last season. And they've just lost three heartbreakers in a row themselves. They were down to the final minutes against Cincinnati on the road. They were lost the overtime game to Connecticut. Lost that last second game against Marquette. So there's a lot of parallels between where Seton Hall is at and where Xavier is at right now. So this might be the type of thing where who comes out of a 9-day break, with a better mindset. Is the mindset better for Xavier right now? Is being at home going to help them? Has practice helped them the last week and a half? Or is Seton Hall, as Shaheen Holloway, going to, shake some magic beans in practice and try to get some things that have been working lately, emphasizing that type of stuff. So, Xavier, it's always hard to win road games in the Big East. On the other hand, look at the places they won last season. They won at Butler. They won at St. John's. They won at Providence. So, in that sense, road games are. Then they won at DePaul and Georgetown as well. So it's not like Seton Hall teams under Shaheen Holloway don't know how to win on the road. So you're facing sort of a damaged Xavier team, and if you can put the type of effort you put out against Villanova and Georgetown, anything is possible.
Yeah, forget about the magic beans. You might be giving some of that Michael secret stuff from Space Jam. I know you '90s babies are gonna get that reference, like I'm a '90s baby myself. But yeah, I expect Seton Hall's gonna compete. I think we're probably expecting a similar game to Villanova in terms of the margin of defeat. Like 12 points. The spread's probably gonna be in the double digits. I believe that it'll be hard for me to believe that this team, after this break, is gonna come out to Cincinnati in an afternoon game on a Tuesday. Granted, it's New Year's Eve, and just lay an egg. I just don't see that happening under Shaheen Holloway's leadership. I just don't. If I'm wrong, then you know what? Fine. I'm wrong. Then I'll just leave it at that. Sometimes you're right.
Well,
Sometimes you're
let's cycle back. Let's cycle back for 10 seconds. Remember the circumstances. What happened last year was Seton Hall was coming off that upset of Connecticut at the
yeah.
Rock
Hmm.
before the Xavier game last season. So I think that they probably felt that they probably got cocky going into the game because again Xavier was down last season. Xavier had a couple of bad non-conference losses, so Xavier was thought to be a punching bag when Seton Hall went into Xavier last season, and then they sort of hung in the game until there were 12 minutes to go. Kadari Richmond gets in the foul trouble, and Xavier makes the big run and puts the game way out of reach. So they can't be coming into this game cocky because they have nothing to be cocky about.
Yeah.
They haven't won a game. They haven't won a game since They haven't won a game in 3 weeks. They've only won one game since they left Charleston. So in that sense, find a way to get a win for crying out. That's sort of something you just got to be hungry. Hopefully, you're hungry at this point of the season to get wins. Or if you're not hungry to get wins at this point of the season, what's going to happen when we get later in the February and into March when, hopefully there's still something to play for. I don't know if there'll be anything to play for in particular, but at least don't defeat yourselves because this is what happens. This is what's happened to teams like DePaul and Georgetown the last 2 seasons, where they just fell into a downward spiral and could never find any reason to get out of them. So this is something you don't want to see happen. So you got to find a way to make this competitive. Put yourself into a game like this against an opponent who, in theory, you match up reasonably well with. For everything Xavier does well on the outside, Seton Hall should be able to counter on the inside. So, but we'll see what happens on Tuesday. I mean, hopefully I don't go out to Cincinnati and see the Pirates get the doors blown off of them, and it's like, okay, what was the point? I'm also going to Butler on the trip
Yeah.
the night afterwards. So, at least if Tuesday stinks, getting to see Hinkle for the first time might make up for it.
Yeah, you're kind of like the vibe of that one is you're like, I just hope both teams have fun. Uh, and like, let's be real, you're not just going there to see Hinkle, you're going there to see Butler Blue. Admit it.
Well, my wife is. I don't.
That's fair.
She's very excited about seeing Butler Blue the fourth. So we'll when I'll leave that report about Butler Blue for a different venue than for a different platform than this. But yeah, that's the Butler trips. Both of these trips are exciting. They're both Big East places. I'm eventually going to try to hit all of the Big East arenas at some point in the next few years. So the fact that the Xavier Butler trip, Seton Hall's playing at Xavier, that just makes the Xavier part of the trip that much more interesting. So, and hopefully it'll be a good game.
Yeah, I mean, Seton Hall and Xavier, they typically have fun, good battles, like at Centos in particular. And listen, like, come from a Seton Hall fan's perspective, I love Xavier's Twitter fan base so much. So I'm hoping that, when you go there, that you run into a guy like Andy Piccirillo, like Cap. I mean, those are my guys for life from Roll Blob. And of course, I know. I'd be shocked if Paul Fritchner and or Adam Baum weren't there. So while you're out there, make sure good old Timmy Ice says hello. And Pat, enjoy the Queen City and Hinkle for that matter. Trust me, I'm gonna be jealous. So you enjoy those two venues. I know I went to Cintas in September and I was only in there for like 5 minutes tops. So now you get to see a game in it, for crying out loud. So enjoy it on my behalf. I know that I'll be working another UCFC match. I'm literally dressed for coming from one, the home opener today. Seeing working that game, and of course, if you saw me yawning throughout this video, let me explain why before we sign off. Okay. Um, there is a basketball high school showcase happening in Utica. It's been going on from Friday the 27th, is going all the way until the 30th. I worked 2 games on Friday, on top of reffing a JV game in a holiday tournament about half hour away earlier in the day. Yesterday, I worked 6 games, 9 a.m., 10:30, 12:45, 2:15, 4 o'clock, and 5:30. And then UCFC today, 2 more games for basketball on Monday announcing, and then UCFC on New Year's Eve. So you could, if you could, looks like I'm hitting the wall, just know I've already hit the wall, and I've hit it pretty hard. So on that note, these
Please
are
make
the
sure
times.
you remember what's the difference between 1-on-1 and 2 shots tomorrow.
Yeah,
Because
trust me.
I think those sixth graders that you're refereeing tomorrow, the parents are going to be more brutal than what was at the Rock last Sunday. To be honest.
Oh yeah, yeah. Trust me. I mean, I actually kicked a parent out of a fifth and sixth grade game early in January of this year. But the great thing is with high school basketball, they don't have to worry about one and one or two shots because unlike men's college basketball, which is still stuck in the 1940s or whatever it is, they still do two halves and they do the one and one and two shots. Every other level of basketball, including now high school boys basketball, they do the four quarters and they don't do the one and one or two. It's just two shots on the 15th foul of the quarter. See how easy it is? You don't have to worry about it's a one and one or two shots. It's just two shots. So much easier.
We'll have to have that debate another time.
That that's fair.
It still throws me off when I see that at women's games. And by the way, quick shout out to the Seton Hall women, 2-0 in the Big East.
yes, sir.
Got the 20-point dub at Hinkle this afternoon. Jada Eads, one of the best freshmen in the Big East, is has become a star in the last couple of weeks. So, hopefully the Seton Hall women keep it going. They have a big game, I think, on Wednesday at Villanova, which, Villanova can be as tough for a visiting women's team to come in as it is for a visiting men's team. So, hopefully they keep their momentum going, playing those 4 10-minute quarters. So, that they're going to be interesting to see. And I'll be making a trip up to Walsh sometime in January to check the women out live. So
Yeah, especially when you have a great player like Faith Masonis. I mean, she is outstanding. And rightfully so. Shout out to Coach B and his squad. Doing some great things on the hardwood. Trying to make some noise. And make that push for a tournament bid. They haven't gone since 2016. But with the crew he's got, more than capable of doing it. So shout out to Coach B and the women's squad for starting Big East play 2-0 with that big 69-49 win at Hinkle, where Pat's going to be on Wednesday. But before that, he'll see the Pirates at Cintas Tuesday, 2 o'clock on Peacock to close out 2024. So that's going to do it for this episode officially. For Pat Madden, I'm Tim Best. Thanks for tuning in. Happy New Year in advance. Hopefully, we'll go into the new year coming off a win at Cintas. Fingers crossed and knocking on wood because I need that as much good juju as possible, knowing how superstitious I am. But that's gonna do it. Till next time, we'll see you in 2025. Pirate Nation, onward to Tonia.